Folks, welcome back to the Property Couch podcast number 3 in our summer series. And today we are talking to a property investor, Ben, who bought their very first property back in 1999, same year I bought my first one, Ben, at the age of 21. And we're also talking a cautionary tale about whether new builds outperform established properties. What else do we cover, Ben?
Oh, I might know the answer to that, but Bryce, it's also about picking up the phone. I'll tell you more about that later. And then finally, this is about getting lucky through taking action.
Getting lucky through taking action. Let's rip into the show.
Welcome to the Property Couch, where each week you get to listen to two of Australia's leading experts. Bryce Holdaway, co-host of Location Australia on Foxtel's Lifestyle Channel, co-host of Escape from the City on the ABC, and partner of Empower Wealth Advisory. Ben Kingsley, chair of Property Investors Council of Australia and the founder of Empower Wealth Advisory, named the 2018 and 2019 Property Advisory Firm of the Year. Stay tuned as they bring you the insider's guide to property, finance and money management.
All right, Ben, we've got another very special guest on this episode of our summer series. We are talking with TPC listener David Morris. Welcome to the Property Couch, Dave.
Good morning, gents. How are we? Thank you for having me.
We're doing well. We're excited. We always get excited when we get to unpack our listeners' stories. So first of all, thanks for being so brave and coming on to chat with us. But
No worries.
as you reflect on your path from, as we'll find out, you bought a Sydney unit at the age of 21 to having multiple properties today.
Yep.
What's a decision that you made that set you apart from the current barbecue conversations where others wish they'd done things differently?
Picking up the phone. I
Tell
think
us more.
literally with that first step, I was like, okay, I need to explore this side of things. I think I was back then the news agent one day when I saw Your Property magazine or Your Mortgage or Property Investor, and then I started reading it. I'm going, what is this? What's this whole thing? My parents had never invested, like they never, bought property bar for their house they built in '73 in French's Forest in Sydney, and so it was just a whole new domain of where it displayed my interest, and I suppose that's what got started. With the journey, and with that journey, by picking up the phone and starting to ring around and look at things, I just led from there.
Yeah, well done. Nice work. So you hinted your parents didn't invest in property then.
Mm.
Can you tell us what you did learn from your parents about money when you were growing up?
Yeah, I think so. I think and I suppose similar to some of the other listeners, the property or the money journey when I was younger was very limited conversations. Didn't really happen at all. Dad was a linesman for Telstra, worked there for 40 years. Mum worked for Australia Post for quite a while. And so I think even though we lived, or the perception was, for living in the Northern Beaches of Sydney, we weren't very well off at all. It was, we did piano lessons and we did soccer and all those sorts of things. But the conversation around the table really did not eventuate with money at all. And I suppose that's where I don't even know really how I got started with it, but I do know that I wanted to do a paper run. And so with that paper run, you got Manly Daily, and you had the streets there of where's available for the next run and all that. I think I was 11 at the time, and so seeing that it popped up down the street, I'm like, great, let's do it. Not thinking that it's 5 o'clock in the morning and it's pouring rain and you've got to actually put these things in letterboxes to get some money. But that sort of led me on to then going to Macca's when I was literally, I think, 14 and 9 months. And so I was there day one at 14, 9 months, and one day I think it was then earning, I think it was like $5 an hour or something, whatever back then. And that kind of just got me on the journey in thinking about finance. And I think I ended up doing business studies at school for my HSC, which I really enjoyed that mechanics of it. And it just led to a passion in it, I suppose.
See, that's interesting. Like to have something like that so young, there's got to be a trigger. I need to, because you're not sure why.
I don't know why actually, and I think I've always thought about that. And I thought, what is the actual trigger? Is it because mum didn't really have money? Maybe I don't know.
Tell me about your parents, brothers and sisters. Were any of them affluent, or did any of them have financial success or something along those lines?
Yeah, definitely. I suppose my auntie and uncle on my mum's side,
Yep.
They were he worked for Commonwealth Bank and was one of the head marketing people there. So I suppose I looked up to them in that regards from
Yeah.
a corporate sort of side of a role. But
Yep.
then they went and opened a CD shop, and so that was again on the Northern Beaches, and that went great guns for at the time. When it was all in, and that's how you got your music, and so
Yeah.
I actually ended up going and working for them after Macca's. And I think looking at the business acumen of what he did and how he built it up, so I went from a smaller shop to a bigger shop and to a bigger shop again, and then obviously that's before podcast came in, or
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
But looking at that, I suppose that might have fed my interest in the area, but it
Yeah,
certainly wasn't from mum and dad in that regards.
yeah, obviously, because it's clear, but there's just this interest in sort of business
Mm.
and commerce, and so tell me, when you started getting your first pay slips, what were you doing with them? Were you buying the next best fatty thing, or were you putting it away and saving it?
I think I was putting it away and saving it, because that sort of, now that I look back at it, yeah, I think I got a new BMX or I got a new mountain bike at the time, and
Yeah,
things like that. But because you didn't have, like it is today, and my young kids now, that everything's new on screen and everything pops up and all that. I suppose you didn't have as much there to want in that regards. Life is a lot more
much
simple.
temptation, you
Just
reckon?
go down the bush track and go for a ride and do things like that. So I suppose I put it away a lot because I didn't really know what to spend it on. But especially when I was at McDonald's and stuff, they um, gave you a very good understanding of processes and systems and all that, and that then gave me the idea of, well, can I start then putting it away? So if they offered an overtime shift, yep, let's do it. In
Yep.
school holidays, I remember out the front standing back the benches one time. I had no idea that wasn't what I was supposed to be doing, but it was being paid extra money, and you got a free cheeseburger with it or something as well. So you know, but then I suppose later on when I left high school, that's where I sort of started thinking, okay, what else is out there? And again, it was back to looking at the Manly Daily, because that's the only real estate I could see. You got your Saturday paper; it was this thick of advertisements,
Yeah.
and then that's when I started looking further afield and looking at where I wanted to go with potentially buying something.
Now, do you remember any conversations with your dad or mum about the money that you were saving? Like, did you have like a Dolomite account, or did you have?
Yeah.
So like, did they compliment you? Did they encourage you? Were they proud of you? What was sort of going on in terms of that feedback loop for you?
Yeah, definitely. I think we did have a Dolomite account, and that was probably I think it ended up going to a St George book that they printed out how much you had in there and things like that. And it sounds old now, doesn't it? But but it was actually probably my or my nana, basically, who lived in Balgowlah, and my grandfather probably, that was giving me that advice of encouragement um, to do things, move on, look at different areas, because we used to spend a lot of school holidays down there
Yeah.
when mum and dad were working. So my nana particularly was a great influence on me in that regards. She went through the war. She was one of the ladies on the land that did a whole heap of stuff when everyone went overseas, and so she had a lot of wise knowledge that she imparted, probably unconsciously, that I would know then, that probably led to that journey, I think, of thinking outside the box and looking at further afield.
Mm.
So in 1999, Dave, you and I did something unique together. That was the year we both bought our first investment property, but you were a bit younger than me. So tell us about that. At the age of 21, you bought a property.
Yeah, definitely. So with buying the property, I looked at a few different areas to buy, and with that, the average in Sydney then was around 200,000 to 300,000 for a unit. I think I was only earning about $30,000 at the time, or $40,000, and that was kind of the top of my limit. So with reading and researching through the magazines and like that, I thought, okay, I'm going to start ringing around real estate agents and find out what the go is and how did you do this thing. And so when I did that, I actually put a deposit on the place on the Central Coast at Gosford, and a townhouse. And then I thought, kind of need to be a bit closer to the Sydney Basin, So pulled that, and then found a place at Hornsby that was within my budget. and I think it was 225,000. I paid for it in '99. Funnily enough, at the same time, my nana's property, which was a beautiful sandstone place built in the '40s down near Manly at Bagala, was she sold that for $555 because my grandfather had passed away then. And so she was moving to a unit, downsizing. And I was like, oh, how can we do it? And I remember talking to my brother at the time, but he'd only just left high school. And we're like, how do we kind of then pull together to then, get this and keep it in the family, but also then potential equity and capital going down the track? I looked at it last night, 4.1 million it's worth now.
4.1 million.
Yep, 25 years.
25 years, and in the same 25 years, you paid what, 225 for your apartment,
and I sold it 10 years later for 375.
And did you do the same exercise? Did you revalue it last night and check? And what did that?
660 for the unit.
So 660, 4 million.
Yeah, but it's always mind-boggling to do those. My grandfather grew up on Ranelagh Crescent in South Perth.
Mm-hmm.
So it was in a housing commission house, and it had the most breathtaking view. You just got parkland across the road. You got the Swan River.
Yeah.
You can see the city. I remember the bicentennial, because Perth does this really awesome fireworks show on Australia Day. It's just a big bonanza of a party. I remember doing it in 1988 when we turned 200, and all my cousins and everyone was there. It was just the most amazing time. But then Dad tells the story about how he had the opportunity to buy that house.
Right.
And
that apartment.
But didn't, right? So we all, and one of the reasons was the mortgage would have been, normal for anyone really stretching and all that sort of stuff, but he would have had to kick his father out of the house, which at the time that he was going to do, that wasn't on the cards. But then he met Mum, and then they obviously needed a family home. But it's always torturous, because if you go and like unbelievably prime real estate in Perth, right? So not too dissimilar to the torture you put yourself through last night. It's
I know. I looked at it and I went,
can be very haunting. But but 21, mate, first property at 21. Tell us a bit about what was going on. I jumped straight into it, but there was a backstory that you told from your parents. There were not a lot of conversations, but how did you jump in at that age? What was there, a mentor? Was there a trigger, or was it just simply the magazines?
I think it was a bit of a combination of both. I had a lot of mentors around me who were older as well, which was really good. And so with that, one of the gentlemen I know had bought a place in Chatswood at the time, which is sort of, only 15 minutes out of Sydney. And he said to me, if you get in now, like, you're not going to regret it. Whatever you do, you're not going to regret it, right? So I was like, okay, yeah, I'm sort of a bit nervous about this. But I suppose that sort of led on to, as well, a couple of years after that, I always took overtime shifts. I was trying to pay it off. I went overseas to Canada for a year, and when I went over there, and this is when interest rates were about 7 or 8%, I think they were, something like that.
Yeah.
I was like, how am I going to essentially earn no money backpacking around Canada, pay for this? And he goes, do not sell it. He said, whatever you're trying to do, don't sell it. So I sold my car, which was 12,000 then, or whatever I sold it for. And that essentially funded the mortgage payments with the rent that I was getting at the time over that period. And then I came back essentially to nothing, had to start all over again. So,
but with a property, when you say all over again, you had a property, right?
Oh, yeah, sorry, I had a property, but no funds.
But those are the days too. Was pre-GST, so there was the amount of cash that you would get back from these properties was pretty good. You often had better yields at the time. So that did that 12,000 actually give you that full year worth of cash flow shortfall?
About 9 months, I think it was, when I worked it out at the time. It was sort of pretty hit and miss from memory. And I think that was not just long after I came back. That was my introduction to special levies and strata for in the building. So we overlooked a massive big entrance into the thing, and then all of a sudden one day they said, everyone's got to pay I don't know, 20 or 30 grand, like that, depending on what size unit it was, because there's concrete cancer. And it was over all the garages. So, and this was just when I came back, and I'm like, what is this? Like, so, yeah.
So how many were in the block, Dave?
I think there was about 30, 35.
Right.
From memory.
So
Yeah.
5-story, 6-story building, or
It was 3 stories.
3-story, just
Yeah.
long. Okay.
Long and kind of an L-shaped sort of thing, and it was opposite like a Westfield Now shopping centre sort of thing. So
Yeah.
it was in a good location, and I think that's where I also got the taste when I went overseas of going overseas. So I weighed it up at the time. Do I keep going overseas every year? Because mum and dad could never afford to take us overseas, and we didn't do that with the kids. Used to go to Queensland and things like that. So when I went over when I was 18, I was like, oh, this is cool. Then the next year and the next year and the next year, and pretty much overseas every year. And I'm very fortunate to do that up until COVID, somewhere, whether it was with work or travel and things like that. And I think it was that decision. I remember at the time saying, do I get another property or do I go to Turkey and experience Anzac Day? So it was kind of, and I suppose I went down that pathway of it.
Which one did you choose?
Oh, sorry, I went
Turkey.
down the travel pathway.
Yeah, yep.
Because I thought, look, I've got something here. When I came back from overseas as well, I had a secure job at the time. My boss said, oh, look, go and come back and you'll have something here, sort of thing. And so I knew I was coming back to some work of some sort. And that was working for Channel 7 at the time. And so, yes, came back and did that. And then that's when I started looking, going, okay, where can I go now? What can I do to expand this and all that? So I felt like ringing the real estate agent every couple of weeks. How much is it worth now? What's it worth, to try and see if we can get capital gain to then be able to put into somewhere else.
And so after that, then what was that decision? Like, what did we decide to do? Did you know about the story of equity release to go again, or did you think that you had to sell the property? Like, were you educated enough to know that you don't have to sell to upgrade? You could potentially release equity and.
Yeah, absolutely. So I did. I got transferred with work to a different location on the Central Coast of New South Wales. And so I was kind of torn between, I rented for 12 months thinking, okay, what am I going to do? Where am I going to go? But I still didn't really, now looking back of it, I wish I had the team around me to advise me of which way to go and say, no, you can keep that. Or, I ended up selling it because I wasn't with my wife then. So single income. I wanted to upgrade, so I bought a place at Avoca, which was, I think it was $466 I got it for at the time. So that was a 3-bedroom place, a couple of minutes from the beach. And I thought, look, with then experiencing the challenges of having a unit in strata, I thought this is brilliant. On my own house, I don't have to worry about strata fees and all that. And then into buying that, which then 10 years later down the track doubled, which was fantastic, which then led us into, essentially now pretty much paying off our PPOR, which is a 5-year-old house, a couple of minutes from the beach.
So take us through that process. Like, you've obviously, so you've traded 2 properties. So you started at 21, you've got your foot in the door. It's also, you've done the hard work in terms of saving a deposit and doing some savings. It's got your foot in the door. That's ticked over. You're able to travel whilst you had that property because the rent was covering it, because you did the hard work. Still had to sell the car, but that was a very smart decision. Kept the appreciating asset, sold the depreciating asset.
You need it anyway.
Exactly.
rolls into okay, we then cash out of that principal place of residence, move obviously up the coast, grab this great property. It doubles in value over how many years again was it?
So basically that doubled in a 10-year period.
10-year period. Okay, so 7.2% compounding return.
Yeah.
So rule of 72. Good. 10 years, yep.
Was that the land that we bought in between that period to build on nearly tripled in value.
Is this the Terrigal land?
Yes.
Yeah, gotcha.
Yep. So we bought basically, so when we still held the Avoca property, in that time, we actually then ended up investing in Melbourne. So the interesting thing about that was in 2014, I still had that passion for something. So even though I'd sold a couple of years earlier to then get into my primary residence, place of residence, we then ended up, I was with my wife then, so we had dual incomes. And this is pre-kids as well. So I remember sitting as a paramedic for 15 years and sitting in the front of the ambulance on the phone to someone going, okay, how are we going to go? What are we going to do like this? And we ended up building a place in Craigieburn in Melbourne. And that's when a lot of people in Melbourne were going, why are you going to Craigieburn? Like, you're nuts. Like, and I said, well, I don't know. Like, it's,
Why did you? How
we
come you
had
chose
some
there?
advice around buyer's agent back then, similar sort of business, and they basically looked at that area for a new build house and land. So now that I know that now, I probably would not have gone down that pathway. But
a buyer's agent that you paid a fee for?
Yep,
Okay.
9,000. Yeah.
Wow.
So they charged you. Did they disclose any potential payment from the developer to build the house or the?
No.
Okay.
Not time.
All right.
So, and what year was this?
That was in 2014.
Okay. So there's probably every chance that he's charged you, and they've also taken some type of payment from the builder or developer or land supply. So unfortunately, that's
you can see how mind-boggling, Dave, because it's pretty rare for a buyer's agent to
yeah.
to
Normally they're free, and then they basically get a kickback from the developer or the builder. So you're reading all of these magazines, and most of the stories are good stories of people who are buying, existing homes, or you're getting those case studies through those books. What attracted you, or what logic was there in better still, what was the sales pitch to go to Craigieburn to buy a house and land package?
Potential development in going north of Melbourne. So it was looking at, close to the airport, the road upgrades up through there. I think, is it through Epping? It goes up there and then up that way. And then the potential development down the track. So it was a long-term mindset. Like, it wasn't like we're going to just flip it in 12 months and all that. And I think at the time it matched our income of what we had to then what we could obviously do. But also as well, that's when New South Wales was starting to kind of have a bit of a surge. And I thought,
so affordability in terms of what you could afford.
Yep.
You're thinking of another capital city, which makes sense, and Melbourne as good as any. In terms of, second biggest and one of the biggest knowledge centres in the country. So you'd like to think that prosperity, economic activity will continue to keep going.
Yeah.
Did you do any measurements on supply and demand? Did you do any assessment of subdivisions? And
I did my own research at the time, and I think I learned a lot out of that from an education point of view, of what to and what not to do, particularly with the 400 land size. Like, obviously they're splitting blocks and obviously now, I know that land goes up and houses go down and all the methodology around that. But essentially, when we did that, I think it was more focused around that we could actually get somewhere else in the state. I think the yield was actually pretty good at the time, from memory. It was a pretty good comparison for what the mortgage was. I think it was got the mortgage before.
So he would have been talking about tax deductions and depreciation because it's brand new.
Exactly.
All the sort of triggers.
Yep.
But when future development, like that's a 400 square metre block, what was the pitch on the future development? Because, we talk about productive use and future use of land as part of, those abilities to, mitigate risk, margin of safety as we refer to it. So what was he pitching down the track in terms of future development? Was it all of the area?
It was the area.
Not necessarily the house.
Yeah, it was the area. So it was the shopping centre that's going to be built at Craigieburn. A new tennis academy is going there, and these sorts of things. So and I really didn't know Melbourne as well. So I'm like, okay, like
because tennis academies that they just spin off economic activity, and they just attract huge amounts of investment. Sorry, Dave. I'm not trying to be rude to you, but it's like you're not like, like convenience to the train to the airport. Right? Okay.
But Dave, based on what you've told us, that property actually did okay.
It did, and so I think that it hasn't. If I look at comparables, say around the country now, and especially with the accessibility of data and things like that, it wouldn't have done as well as somewhere else if I invested in 2014. But it did okay. So
you got trend growth, basically.
That's it. And I think the benefit is we ended up making the decision earlier this year to actually sell that. and recycle the asset. And that was a combination of things of potentially my wife changing careers and then paying down our PPOR. So essentially, we've really got not much left on our primary residence in Terrigal.
Yep.
And kids are getting older and stuff like that. So it actually worked for us. But I'm actually also glad we've got rid of that asset too. I was really hesitant, and I listened to a lot of stuff about should we sell or should we not, listened to you guys sort of talk of pros and cons, and I think at the time it was the right decision. The yield was pretty ordinary, and it was still costing us. Oh, look, it was probably break even, to be fair, at the end.
Do you remember the land to asset ratio? Like,
I don't.
what would you buy? Do you remember what you bought the land for?
The land was 220, I think it was.
And what was the build?
Up to 230, 240, something like that.
Okay, so 50% land to asset ratio, or around that. So remember, rule of thumb for us is a minimum of 60 if we can get it.
Yeah.
And especially if we're buying in those cheaper, more affordable areas, we want to move that land to asset ratio up as high as we can actually get it. So, so to your point, 400 square metre, it was a 4 and 1, 4 and 2.
Yep, 4 and 2.
So on 400 square metres, so a little bit of a backyard, not much, right? Literally the whole house stuck on it, Lego land pushed up hard against the fence.
Yep.
That's the way they build them these days in those new estates. Now, this is 2014, so it's you probably would have had a little bit more. The street sizes would have been a little bit more, but the optimization that they do in these brand new estates now, like, God forbid a fire ever goes off in one of those areas in terms of getting a fire truck to basically go down the street in some of these tight, because they get as many subdivisions as they can of lots in there, and then they literally put a house on it and there's nothing left.
I remember looking at it. I don't think it actually had eaves. So
literally
like
that was very common. That was very common through that period of building. So don't worry about heat. Don't worry about heat exchange or like any of that sort of stuff. Just basically it's all about cost savings. Yeah.
So Dave, you bought that one in 2014. You sold it to pay off your PPOR. When did you sell it? What year?
This year actually. So in April this year. So
2024. And if your notes to us, you doubled, right? So you bought it for $450 and it sold for $900.
Oh no, so they're the ones that we've got at the moment. So the what we sold it for was $685.
$685.
So I actually used that to leverage off that mortgage with the equity in there to buy a Queensland property. Okay. So in 2018, I sucked, I think it was about $100,000 out of Craigieburn. And then basically we bought in Doolandella, which is just south of Brisbane, in near Forest Lake there, and did a 4-bed, 2-bath, similar sort of thing again. But that has gone up significantly. So we bought it for $565.
65, yep.
Worth about $850, $900 now.
On a CAGR run rate of 6.97, so basically 7%, which is there's a living in getting a 7% compounding return for 30 years.
Yeah, exactly. And so that surprisingly to me and my wife as well. So I took my wife on the journey as well about learning about property, and she's like, "What are you doing?" And but I think that it's led to multiple conversations with friends over the time as well. Just looking at the levers I pull, and essentially Craigieburn was a lever to pull, right? So I had 3 levers to pull, 2 in Queensland and 1 down there in our PPOR. And so we pulled that, and that's actually then made our lifestyle better now, or not as, sort of tight, especially with how everything is. But I've still got 2 there in Queensland.
Okay. So you bought in Doolandella, and then you've bought another one. Also in Queensland, you just hinted. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so that's just about to finish the building process. So that's a 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom or 2.5 bathroom double garage in McDowell. So just near Chermside in Queensland, and that the challenge with that one has been is when we signed up for that, because it was part of a development. The building time has really blown out. So it's taken over 3 years to build it. And it wasn't, I got a phone call a couple of weeks ago that I didn't really enjoy, to say that the sunset clause has expired and we've got to pay another $50,000.
Well, at least they're giving you another chance, mate, instead of just taking it off you and selling for some more. Mate, how long have you been listening to the podcast for?
Probably 18 months, nearly 2 years now, I think.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So, and these are all these decisions were made pre-listening to podcasts, right?
Yep, absolutely. Yeah,
So, so because we've gone from um, an established property to, I think the Avoca was established property, right?
correct. Yep, that was
And then
correct. Yep.
and then from there we've gone brand new in Craigieburn, brand new in Doolandella, and brand new in McDowell.
Down. Yep, that's
So,
correct.
so, so based on what you know now, if we were to,
Mm.
we've already sort of done Craigieburn, right? But if
Yep.
what you know now, we've got back to 2018.
Mm.
Would you still have bought Doolandella?
I would have bought in Queensland, but probably not built in Dillondilla. I would have bought an established property.
Okay, and
Um,
then I suppose it's another layup. But what about the townhouse in McDowell? What would be no?
No, and
Yeah.
and again, I looked at the time. So when I was researching it and looking at the general area around there, I had some different areas there of thought process around, again, infrastructure, closeness to Brisbane Airport, and vicinity down to the city. Um, and with that though, when I looked at it, I thought, yep, it's all good. And I actually looked at established houses in McDowell as a comparison, and I wish I hadn't looked at it the other week. Probably lost about 400 grand there, but anyway. So the equivalent to buy back then, it was 3 years ago, 2021, to what like the townhouse is. Yes, it's still gone up, and it's worth about 950 now from the recent val on it. The rent's definitely gone up, so the rent's
What's your contract price on the 950 now?
so the contract price is 805.
Okay,
Mm.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's had trend growth that's sort of been happening, but where the best returns have been
Yep.
have obviously been in the established
Oh,
properties.
hands down.
Yeah, hands down. And look, just a little side note here. I've run the rental analysis inside Moorr for you on the Doolandella.
Yep.
And so you potentially, under our analysis here, little Opti's gone off and done her work. You can get up to $670 a week for rent on that property now, and you're only getting around $620 to $630.
Yeah,
So there could be an extra $50 a week that you
Yep.
can get in rent on that property based on our analysis.
Awesome.
So
Yeah, and I
that's
think using the Moorr platform too that's one of the things that's really opened my eyes. Used to be able to do spreadsheets like a lot of people write things down on paper and over the years and whatnot. But that is just an absolute. I've been looking for something like that for years. It's an absolute godsend with that program to then put everything in, look at the calculations, play around with it. Like my wife says, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm just playing with this platform again," and looking at the different figures and what you can do, and particularly now having kids, and then looking at the swimming lessons or the basketball and putting all those expenses in and looking at it as an overall summary of your finances and trying to be disciplined with it versus trying to just write down the property element or this element or that element or schooling fees and things like that. The Moorr platform is absolutely brilliant.
For those who are listening along at home, not watching, Ben's eyes just lit up then, and there's usually two things for
I
that.
just know it works, Bryce. It works.
One is talking about Collingwood, which is enough to put me to sleep, and the other one's talking about Moorr, which I like talking about. So thanks.
Sorry, you're
Thanks,
talking about Sydney, were you?
Say again.
You're talking about Sydney?
Well, do you want to talk about Sydney?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, no, actually, I shouldn't have brought that up.
Perhaps we might want to stand down on that one. But okay, so what has been your major takeaway from listening to the podcast for the last 18 months? What's been the number one thing that's landed for you, given that you've had a track record of investing in property?
Yeah, I think that the probably the biggest takeaway is the diversity of people that you have on is fantastic, right? So it gives you a really rounded snapshot of the community. And the one thing is that with where you go, with where you make those decisions, you've actually got to take action, as you say, and make those decisions. And I think, even if people are setting this around Christmas time for your New Year's resolution, if you have a New Year's resolution, pick up the phone like I did when I was 21 and actually do something, right? It doesn't have to be everything. Just take a bite size at a time. And with looking at the podcast and what we'll learn of it is that you got to balance it from your lifestyle to where you want to go. And obviously, I'm 46 now. I'm starting to have those conversations with people and mates who are just turning 50, and they can go into those over 50s, and you're like, well, how do you get here? But I suppose with the barbecue conversations that we're having too, I've had a lot of friends over the time that have said, I'm gonna. And it's funnily enough, I was having a conversation with one of my good friends last night, and she's saying, "Oh, I've still got to do that with investment property." This is like 10 years ago. I was talking to her about it,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and I said, "But you've missed out on all that capital growth." Oh yeah, but what?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
And so I think with the platform, with the different guests that you have on the series, it really gives you a good perspective of how you personalize it in your own life, and then you can take snippets from everywhere. So I don't think it's actually probably, Bryce, I don't think it's one specific element, or probably not to build and then
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
I was probably wondering if that's where we might go. But
Yeah.
what's interesting is I read recently, I think it was a blog around nostalgia, and quite often we look at an old photo
Mm,
and we get, oh, look, wouldn't it be amazing if we could go back to that time? We see our kids when they're really young, and we go, oh, it's so amazing. But what we forgot at the time was um, we were under enormous stress. We'd just bought
mm,
our first mortgage. We didn't know what we're doing as a parent, but that stuff totally gets thrown out of the window
yeah.
because we know how the story ends, right? We
Yeah.
know how the story ends, and why this is really important is because, and I think it's particularly important for property investors, is because whenever we go and you say to that friend of yours that you spoke to last night,
Mm,
but you've missed out on 10 years of capital growth, the problem
mm,
with that is you know how the story ends, right?
yeah. True.
But when we have to actually make the decision to buy, we do not know how the story ends. And that is
No.
the difference. That is why on these barbecue conversations, everyone is an expert on why they should have bought one in the past,
Yep.
because we know how the story ends. And I guess the most successful people take action when they don't know how the story ends. And I think
Yeah.
that would how we would sum up you, right? You've got a paid off house in a beautiful part of the world. You've got
Mm,
other investment properties, and sure, we can all reflect now that maybe we would do
mm,
things differently. But I think choosing you versus your friend last night, do it every day of the week, right? Because
mm,
you actually took action and you did stuff and you moved forward. You made the phone call at
mm,
21 and you bought that investment property. And I think
mm,
that's one of the things that I want to really land for folks listening to this episode is how do you feel about making a decision when you don't know how the story ends?
mm.
Because the people who are successful are the ones who actually do it despite that.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with that more. If I could tell my 21-year-old self now what I know,
Yeah.
and I've had a few conversations with mates, kids that are now again in the 20s, I'm like, just do it. Go,
Yeah.
do it. You know?
No, it's one of those important questions is, what would you change? I came across a Morgan Housel podcast recently, and I'll recommend, we might even put a link in the show notes, but why pessimism sounds so smart. And
Mm,
so it sort of talks to the psychology and the story and the stories we tell ourselves around,
mm,
that pessimism and why we are potentially, built around procrastination and not
yeah.
necessarily taking action and so forth.
Mm.
And I think, to the friend that you're trying to get started and to
Probably ought to
take
listen to
action,
this one then.
yeah, and if you think about James Clear stuff in terms of, you know, best thing to do is just put the runners beside the bed. So as soon as you got the shoes on,
Mm,
you're going to do it, right?
mm,
Like it's just those little sort of hacks that you do. You eat well. We'll put the fruit bowl right next to where you're walking past before you go to the biscuit jar or something along those lines.
mm,
And I think one of the big challenges around building wealth and investing money is this whole concept that in terms of speed to result,
yeah.
it's not quick,
No,
right?
not at
It's
all.
just not
Yeah.
quick.
Mm,
And I think, and so even putting your information into a platform like Moorr or doing all of those sort of different things, it does take a bit of effort to start.
mm,
But so for someone like her, it'd be almost like, I'd say let's just sit down for 30 minutes and I'll take you through it. And I just want to let's put some numbers in there and like, okay, what's your wealth speed? Well,
mm,
here's what your wealth speed. What is that? Well, that's how
mm,
much your money's working for you every hour of the day. All right, well, not very good, is it? No. Okay, so at least we know it's not going so well. So
mm,
what's our job? Well, we've got to get our wealth speed a little bit quicker. Here's your wealth clock. This is what your current situation looks like.
mm,
Now, ultimate. And then what are we spending and what are we enjoying now today? Well, now we're enjoying, I spend about this much. Well, in retirement, if you don't have a nest egg, then
Mm,
you're not going to be able to spend only about half of that. How would that make you feel in
yeah,
terms of in retirement about only being able to, well, I won't be able to go on the holidays. No, and I won't be able to do the things and I won't be able to have a new car or a
mm,
safe car. Well, no, all of those things then get impacted by the story that so it's like, well, so now how much of that has now motivated you to just make that call as you put it, Dave? And
mm.
so what sort of games do you play with your friends when you're sort of trying to get them to take action?
I think the thing is they're obviously all got different backgrounds, and then they're all different stages of their financial journey.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
one of the things that I think is, and it has come up a couple of times, is having discipline around your finances. I know some mates like to spend everything they got every week, right? And they've got
Yeah.
nothing left in their bank.
Yeah.
And there's interesting. I saw or listened to something a couple of months back with, I don't know if you've seen the 5 a.m. Club side
Yep.
of things, and he talks about neuroplasticity and basically the changing the brain pattern over a 6 to 9 week period before you stop buying 10 coffees a day or before
Yep.
you whatever you do. And so I challenge them on some of those things and say, well, okay, so can you just cut back on one or two things, because then that's another step forward to then be able to get that deposit or pull equity out. And I think that's one of the things that I really like from a journey side of things, that I'm quite passionate in this area, but I also provide education to them. But it's that next step of actually twisting their arm behind, going, just do it,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and take action. And then it's not till now they go, oh, you don't spend. Funnily enough, when I refinanced recently, they had to increase our expenses on clothing to then make it look like, because we don't need to buy a shirt every day or things like that, to make it look like that we're spending the right amount in the calculators for the finance. And I'm like, that's crazy. Like
Yeah.
that's just
Yeah,
absolutely.
well, that's the responsible lending obligation that the broker might have based
Mm,
on, the credit team at the bank who's saying, well, there
mm,
seems to be an exorbitant amount of money being spent there. Can you demonstrate to me that they only buy clothing once every 12
mm,
months and that's why it's a very large amount on credit cards or a very large amount,
mm.
of expenditure during that time. So I think, yeah, there are elements of, how you submit a loan application to mitigate those types of flags that are going to come up in
Yeah,
credit policy is quite important, and that's the
yeah.
skill of an investment savvy broker.
Mm,
Which is probably part of my next question is around um, how much value have you now put on building up your team of advisors around you,
yeah.
so you feel like you've got someone who's not just going to agree with everything you say,
Yep.
but it's going to challenge you where it needs to be challenged, like a true trusted advisor.
Yep.
But you can also know that ultimately they've got your best interests at heart.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the people that we do spend a lot of time, or we have spent a lot of time with, is our accountant. So
Yep.
he's got a lot of investment properties, and he's very savvy in that mindset and
Yep.
looking at how, like, the pros and cons. And I think he said to me probably 12 months ago, is, Dave, if you're going to sell something, you're going to have to pay capital gains tax on it at some stage. Whether you do it now or die down the track, you're still going to have to pay it, right? So, but he's very savvy in the regards of looking at the pros and cons of both, and then looking at the sensibility around, say, potentially the next one. So his advisors recently said, look, you could probably do another one in your super to balance it out, sort of thing. And then that way you kind of, you've got shares, property, mostly property, for your retirement. And I think it's getting to this stage as well that we're starting to think about that. Not there yet, it's a mid-40s, but starting to think about it and what are we actually doing. And I think we're in a very good spot. And I kind of go to tell myself that we're in a very good spot financially from our family, whereas a lot of mates aren't, and they're kind of going, oh, that all moment, what do we got to do quickly, and double property in 2 years, then we can have a income coming in when we retire. And I think that's definitely the shift of the barbecue conversation from young kids going out to where it is now. Kids are getting a bit older. Some of them are now leaving home as well, and they're going, oh, what now? Have we missed the boat, sort of thing? And I think that's one of the things that's a shame, that a lot more people haven't done it. over the time to then create that self-generated wealth, not inherited wealth.
Yeah, and in speaking to our community, it's really important that if someone's in their early 50s and they think that they need to play catch up, don't don't
That's a
try
rude
and make
away.
up for lost time and be aggressive.
Yeah.
Still do the fundamentals really well. Be careful about how you diversify and the sort of, the things that you're trying to do. And
Mm,
remember, even with direct residential property, you can diversify by having something in a different state, and looking at, all of the fundamentals associated with that. And to your point, Dave, what you've got a lot of trust in your accountant. You've demonstrated, a reasonable financial literacy. You've demonstrated a capacity to be interested in the money management, and using the Moorr platform is allowing you to understand that. So you're the type of person that would potentially be suitable for a self-managed super fund in my mind as well. If I was working with you for several years around that,
yep.
and I got a judgment around what that would look like, I
Mm,
think that is sensible. Someone who's coming in off the street and would be speaking to the accountant, I would hope that they wouldn't be saying, well, here, how you can play catch up is, set up a self-managed super fund
yeah.
because you've got enough money. So let's go hard
Mm,
inside the super fund.
yeah.
Ultimately those types of things are, what's their capacity? What's their financial literacy? What are their competencies? Are they going to be able to manage this?
Mm,
And all of those things I think are really important in terms of the right type of people. Because at the end of the day, under a self-managed super fund, you have the massive obligation, and responsibility. You can outsource the admin,
yeah.
but as the trustee of the fund, it's all on your shoulders, and
Mm,
that's really important for people to understand.
exactly. And I think that's really important to look at that, and also the limitations in the self-managed super fund too.
Yeah,
You can't just sell it and then get the cash out tomorrow, and
Ah,
things
yeah,
like
and there's no cost. Like, there's plenty of cost. You don't
yeah.
get away from the cost.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
Hey Dave, what's the North Star? What's going on for you now? You've obviously shared your navigation towards a debt-free home in Terrigal,
Mm,
which is again central coast of New South Wales. It's a wonderful part of the world. You've now got other investment properties. What's the to your point, mid-40s, still got a fair
mm,
bit of time before working life needs to wind down or stop. But
mm,
what are you more motivated by, things or experiences? And you've hinted that with travel early, but
yeah.
what does that look like for the next 20 years for you? And because at some point in time, your barbecue friends are going to watch this, right?
They're
And
already started
and
with
see how lucky you were. But
yeah.
what is it that you're optimizing for now?
I think definitely having a couple of young kids, 7 and 9 now, it's creating experiences for them, and then as a family as well, and having the financial ability to be able to do that. So I'm pretty tight on my funds, like I have been for many years, and I'll never pay full price for anything. So I'm not going to change that. But I think it's more around providing experiences for them that they're going to remember, and being able to have the disposable income to do that, with then balancing it out with your retirement as well and maintaining those investments. And that way, then I'm not stressing about the mortgage payment of $800,000 that I've got to pay when I'm 62, or things like that. Because I know people are in that situation, and they're reliant on the pension as well.
Yep.
And I don't want to be like
And Dave, as you look at the sacrifice,
that.
has it been a hard sacrifice? Like, has it felt like it's, that you've gone without, or that you've had to do your hard, for a longer period of time? And you've done one great thing, right? You started really early,
Mm,
so that's taken a lot of the hard away. But
mm.
does does it feel like you've compromised a lot in the journey that you've been on?
Potentially, but because I did shift work and we always work weird hours anyway, it was just normal.
Yeah.
So I think we compromised on Christmases, on birthdays, and that, because you're working, because it was, at that time of the year or whatever it was. So when, with the compromise with finances, yes, we have compromised on some things, absolutely. Um,
Yeah.
and both me and my wife have very strong work ethics, so we always took overtime pre-kids more so,
Yeah.
to then pay down what we could off the primary residence, and then that has then aided us to then be able to get this place here, And then with that, then essentially we nearly paid that off. So I think there's like $80,000 left on it or something. So with having that there and those levers, absolutely, you've had to sacrifice and not just buy crap and just and what does it do at the end of the day? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So although my wife did want us to put in a pool, which we did, and that was an expensive experience, but it did increase the value of the property, so I'm happy with that.
That's important. So are you in your forever home now?
Sometimes.
I think so. I really enjoyed here. But I don't think I'd never say never. Like there's always opportunity. There's always things down the track that you don't know. But I really do enjoy it here now. So at the moment, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, well done. Well, mate, you've been super transparent and sharing lots of really private details of how you've arrived at the position that you're at. So, my final question for you is, which bit of your story mattered the most to share with our audience? Because we've done a few of these now, Ben and I. So the people are becoming more and more okay and confident on coming onto these summer series and sharing some of this stuff. But early days it wasn't. But it's definitely still brave and transparent and authentic for you to do it. So, which part of your story did you think would benefit the community the most?
Make a decision to take action. So what I mean by that is you might not always make the right decision, but that's okay. You learn from it. You learn from everything. And so I suppose at the end of the day, if you, as I said sort of earlier on, make it a New Year's resolution to pick up the phone, call a mortgage broker, see what your finances are. What can you do? Because then that next step might be purchasing that place, which then goes to another if you want to. And I think with taking one step, like you're saying before, Ben, with having the joggers next to the bed and things like that, if you don't change the way you're going, no one else can. You've got to do it for yourself.
Yeah, well said.
Nice words, mate. Nice words. So my final question is in two parts. I want you to go back to when you were young and your Dolomite account. How often did you look at that little bank book and see the money in there and study that and see it growing? Was that something that you did?
Yep, absolutely, all the time. And I think even like the Sunday paper, they had finance sections in there, or I can't remember really, but I know there was finance stuff in there. And so I'd look for the Sunday paper and go, okay, where's it at? What's the domain equivalent or real estate equivalent then? And that was the first part of the education journey, I suppose.
Here's an interesting sort of man of my own heart there in terms of the fact that I did look at my little state bank little book, and I don't know why I did it, but I have these little memories of turning the pages and seeing it going up and down and watching it primarily going up. That's one of my foundational memories that I have about, and I think that is definitely a psychology and a mindset of an aspiring Australian, and it shows up also in the research that they've done around what they do know about sort of 25 to 40% of the Australian population. If you are interested in it and you're looking at your bank statements and you're just taking a conscious idea, so you've got this conscious awareness, they are the people who tend to take the action the most. And we're, our mission is to make those unaware and those people who didn't do that to transform. But there's that transformation story for you didn't need to be there. And this sort of rounds out my second question. I normally like to ask this earlier in the conversation. Your brother and other siblings that grew up in exactly the same household, have they taken a similar journey to you, or are they on a different path?
Sort of. I had one brother, and he's 2 years younger. He's now a GP and got his own practice. So a lot of the money's gone into
building his business, which is great,
and all that. Not so much the primary residence, but I did a couple of years ago say, look, you need to do this, this, and this. Didn't take action. I think, and so he could have, his finances at the time, he could well have taken action. And I suppose it even goes back to, when he first left high school, and that would have been fantastic to be able to buy my nana's place and keep it in the family. But you do what you do at the time, but yeah, I don't think he's got the fiscal responsibility that that some of us show with developing things, and doesn't have the passion for it as well. So
so same parents. Different part, and that's still okay. There's no judgment here. It's just I'm just trying to find these little patterns There's little ways in which we know for some people it's easier and
Yeah,
other people it's a little bit harder. And unfortunately, for those other people, we've got to get their hard done so they do take action, which is obviously
absolutely.
the strong message that you've delivered today for us, Dave. So we really appreciate you coming on to our summer series and sharing your wisdom. Your story looks amazing in terms of the journey that you're on. That really, there's only a lot more upside in terms of the next decade. The power of compound is going to magically produce a wonderful result for you and your kids are going to be the beneficiaries of that. And those experiences that you're going to be able to enjoy with Michelle and the kids is just going to be out of this world. So, congratulations to you and thank you for coming on to hopefully inspire the next generation of people to take action and do what they need to do.
Yeah, action. Well done, buddy. Nice work. It's been a wonderful story, and mate, from everyone here on the Property Couch, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks very much, Bryce. Thanks very much, Ben.
Thanks, Dave.
All right, mate. That was barbecue conversations. Aren't they amazing at this time of the year? We're in the shadows of Christmas next week, and barbecue conversations was a very big part of this conversation. But what's really, really stands out is Dave has conversations at the barbecue about what he did, and a lot of his friends are having conversations about what they wanted to do, what they should have done, what they could have done. And I think I really like that part of the discussion because, property success really comes down to someone having the ability, and we talked about it in the interview, having the ability to take action when the outcome is unknown. And that's the really hard part.
Yeah, it is. And I think what I also love about Dave is he's trying to pay it forward. He is trying to, he's come on, obviously, the podcast to share his message to everyone in our community, but he's also having conversations with his friends. When some of them are listening, some of them are not quite listening, but he's nudging them in the right direction. So he's doing God's work in our view in terms of helping people financially transform. So I really love that idea about his story. I also, I talked earlier about picking up the phone to learn. So, he said that straight away. He says, I just build knowledge, build understanding, and turn that into actionable experiences. So, he got lucky through action, I think you said early as well. And through the decisions that he was making, he took that action. So he learned, he built up a bit of knowledge, and then he obviously executed. Now, in some cases, there's a couple of purchases that he's made, potentially through some groups of people who are guiding him in a certain direction. We've said enough about that. But really, here's his story pretty much about making sure that when he was growing up, he had really limited money conversations. So he had to learn himself, but he was naturally inspired in terms of that and naturally motivated. So it's a solid, great story. And, the financial story that is exposed now and what will be available to him and his family in the next 20 or so years is going to be incredibly beneficial for them, where they won't have to worry about money ever again, and they'll have really strong financial security behind them.
Living the dream on the Central Coast, almost fully paid off house with a suite of investment properties. That's good. But Ben, I want to talk to Dave's mates. So for those of you, you know who you are. If you're one of Dave's mates, he's probably sent you this link to either listen or watch. We want you to lean in, and he's not lucky. Dave is not lucky. He actually just made it happen. He actually took some action when he didn't know what the outcome was going to be, and he just made his money in the wait. So, folks, if you don't want to go to the next barbecue with him, having to have a conversation around whether or not you took action or not, chances are you should take his lead. So, little friendly reminder to his mates, Ben.
I think it's a good one because he made some sacrifices along the way, did a little bit of hard in there as well. So it's a great story.
Good on you, Dave. Thanks for coming on to the podcast. And just a little reminder, folks, that it's Christmas next week. So clearly for those people who celebrate Christmas, we want to wish you an incredible time with your family and your friends over this festive season. Hopefully you get some time with your family and friends. For those of you watching along, for those of you listening, you won't see that Ben just put his Santa hat on.
It's Christmas time.
And Ben, I might take a little break shortly from the book writing, but don't worry, we'll be getting straight into that again after the festive season. But it's been a wonderful year hanging out with all of you on the podcast this year. I know we've got one more to go before the year's out, Ben, but as we reminisce around this time of year, we just hope that everyone has a wonderful time and a wonderful break and a chance to reset and recharge, ready for a big 2025.
It's that whole gratitude time of the year where you respect and recognise those people who have been around you, that have helped you, that have made your year the year that it was, and obviously some of those who are no longer with us, to also remember them, those loved ones, and the beautiful things that they brought into our lives as well. So it's a celebrative time. It's a time for gratitude and appreciation. So Merry Christmas to everyone, and we'll catch you in another week.
Well said, Ben. Thanks again, Dave, for your contribution to this wonderful Summer Series episode today. And Ben, until next week.
Merry Christmas, and knowledge is empowering, but only if you act on it.
Merry Christmas, folks. See you next week.